Okay, so morning everybody. Great to have you all here again. For those who don't know me, I'm Helen Dallas from the Freshwater Research Centre, and today we're going to be, Jeremy Shelton and myself are going to be talking through the next training session on the Freshwater Biodiversity Information System, or FBIS. I see some very familiar faces or names in the room. So welcome, and then welcome to any of you who have joined us for the first time. I think what I'd like to do to start today's session is just see if there were any questions from the preceding sessions. If anyone has a burning issue that they wouldn't mind just asking at this stage, feel free to put your hand up. I'll just wait a few seconds for that. Everyone okay? Okay, that's perfect. So what I did want to do just before we focus on today's session, I just want to quickly share my screen. We are recording it, so hopefully that's fine with all of you. As you know, you get sent the recording after the session. So what I wanted to do today, before starting with session 4, is it was a suggestion that came from Carol in one of our earlier sessions. In the FBIS system, we have two main sites. The first site is the live site, which has the freshwaterbiodiversity.org URL. And that is where the data is live. And obviously, it's very important that the integrity of that data remains intact. But to accommodate training, what we have done is to develop a testing site. And Carol's suggestion was for us to add this to our help menu, which we've done. Very good suggestion. Thank you, Carol. Where you can see now, and this is going to become increasingly important when we start training on adding sites and adding data, because obviously you don't want to add data to the live site, but the testing site is like a scratch pad. You can add, delete, test all the workflows. And there is a URL link here, which opens up the testing site. And you'll see if I click on that, it's virtually a replica of the current site, the live site, and the same login credentials will work, assuming there's been a Sunday in between, because a Sunday is when the live site gets mirrored to the testing site. The initial map that you see, the main difference is the testing site has green dots and the URL says testing healthy rivers, whereas the live site is our freshwaterbiodiversity.org and the map has bright yellow sites. So that's the main difference. I just wanted to already share that information with you and let you know that it has been added to the help as a link for you to use going forward. Okay, so what I'd like to then jump into now is just to refresh where we are. So this is our 4th training session. The first session was an introduction. The second was about filtering. Last week's session was an overview of the spatial layers. And today, Jeremy's going to be diving into the dashboards, specifically a focus session on single site dashboards and multi-site dashboards. So I think what I'd like to do now is just to step over to the pre-recorded video. Again, feel free to write comments in the chat, questions, points of clarity, or jot it down and put your hand up after once we get going. Okay, so let's kick off with
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to tutorial 4 in the FBIS training series. And today, the focus is on the site dashboards, both the single site and the multi-site dashboards on FBIS. So a site can be searched for in different ways. The easiest way is just to navigate the map and click on the site that you're interested in. But you can also use the search bar and enter the site code for the site that you're interested in. And in my case, I'm interested in a site in the Upper Berg River catchment, close to a little bridge crossing on a tributary. So first up, you're presented with the site code and the number of records and the number of taxa that are found within that site. And if you click Sites Overview, you get a little overview dashboard about the site at the top on the right here of the screen. Now, on the top of the overview dashboard are some basic details about the site, including the site code. Every site on the FBIS platform has a unique site code, which is a combination of the first letters of the river name that it's near to, and then a number as well. If your site had a description, then that description would be shown here. You also get the spatial coordinates, the ecoregion, in this case, the Southern Folded Mountains, the geomorphological zone, and the name of the river that the site occurs on. You then get a breakdown of the data available at that site. And you can see in this case, there are no data for anurans, adult odonates, algae, and invertebrates. There are data for fish as well. You're also able to, the next panel down here is where you can add new data to the site, for example, SAS data or other kinds of data. And finally, if available, there's some climate data particularly for that site down at the bottom of the site overview dashboard. The next thing that you can do is you can use this little green dashboard button to drill down into the detailed dashboard for the site. And this is the most detailed information available on the FBIS platform at the site level. So I'm just going to walk you through it. First, we'll go down through this column on the left here. And this is a bit more detail available than on the overview panel. You have a filter history. In our case, we didn't really use any filters, but if you had used filters to query the data, and that's how you arrived at your site, the paper trail of those filters would be showed here, but it does show that the code of my site, and it also shows the data sources that were used, that were turned on when I was selecting that site as well. The site can be seen in a little map panel on the single site dashboard. And then there's an overview of a lot of the most useful information associated with that site. Without going into too much detail, once again, you can get the site code that's given to the site by FBIS, but you can also see the original site code. This would be the site given, the code given to the name given to the site by the data owner, the person who uploaded the site. And if there's no specific description for a site, it's literally just given the name of the river that it falls closest to on the FBIS rivers layer. Then there's some more information about the river and the geomorphological zone down below that. And then there is information on the freshwater ecoregion within which the site's found, the province or neighboring country, in our case, the Western Cape. The South African ecoregion, it's in the Southern Folded Mountains, the different levels of catchment hierarchy within which the site occurs. And then there's information on the water management area and the number of species and taxa that have been recorded at the site. If available for those taxa, there's then a little breakdown of the taxonomic data according to origin, so the number of non-native and native species records, endemism, using the FBIS endemism categories, which we touched on in a previous tutorial, and conservation status, the number of taxa falling within the different conservation status categories. Then you can see all the site visit data for this particular site. You can see that this site was actually sampled on a few different dates. And you can see right at the bottom here, the occurrence data for the different taxa of fish that have been recorded at this site. These data can be downloaded, the occurrence data, as well as a host of different other attributes that go along with the data, many of which are the attributes that we've just been through now, in a spreadsheet, can be downloaded as a CSV file, and we're going to have a detailed look at CSV files in an upcoming training session. But for now, I just wanted to show you that if you click on the download a CSV button, you're just asked what the purpose is of your download, and you just select your purpose from a drop-down, and then if you hit download, that'll send a message to the FBIS administrators, who will then allow your download to take place. All right. Then right at the bottom of the dashboard here is the metadata table, and this is the source reference from which the data for this site come. In this case, the data are from a peer-reviewed scientific article by Jeremy Shelton and colleagues from the year 2018, and there's other information about that reference in the metadata table, which again can be exported as needed. Then on the right of the detailed site dashboard are some visualizations of the data. At the top, pie charts are used to illustrate a breakdown of the data with regards to origin, endemism, conservation status, sampling method, and the biotope in which the data were collected. And then the occurrences are shown over time. The site was sampled in 2015 and in 2016. Taxa present at the different sampling times are shown using different colors. And just to let you know that these graphs have a little bit of flexibility. For example, I know that the indigenous species are Pseudobarbus bergi and Syndelia capensis, but that Oncorhynchus micus, or the rainbow trout, is non-indigenous. So if I wanted to, I could turn off that non-indigenous species, and then my graph will show only the two indigenous taxa. It then packages the data by origin, so native and non-native species, and then it summarizes it by the endemism categories and also by the conservation status categories as well. And that's really it for the single site detailed dashboard. But before we leave it, I'd just like to show you that you can use this little tab here to download the chart as a SVG file, which can then be inserted into Microsoft Excel and Word. And that applies to anywhere where you see this little button, be it a table here on the left or a graph on the right. Okay, so let's return to the map interface. And this time, let's have a look at the multi-site dashboard. So that was the single site. Now we're next going to have a look at the multi-site dashboard. And I think what I'm going to do this time is use my map to navigate into Cederberg Wilderness area, just to the northwest of Cape Town. And what I always like to do before a new search is just to use the little reset button here at the top of the search bar, just to make sure that you don't have any filters from your previous search still activated. So we can zoom in on that Cederberg area. And in particular, let's have a look at the area around the Seerflay River. I know that there are some interesting fish data there. And what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to use the lasso tool to draw a polygon around the data that I'm interested in. So I'm particularly interested in all of the data records in the Seerflay River and also down into the Groot River before it joins the Doring River. So if I encircle those in with my lasso and I hit update search, then it will feed back information just on those records. And you can see straight up in the search result tab that there are 190 records from those sites. You can also see that there were 59 sites and a total of 233 taxa. So this is going to be interesting. So the next thing I'll do is I'll hit, once again, the sites overview button to bring up the quick overview of the sites. And you can see that this time there are data available for multiple biodiversity modules. If you remember last time, it was just the fish. Now we have data for fish, invertebrates, nothing for algae, but we do have adult odonates and anurans as well. So we get our filter history, we get a breakdown of our biodiversity data, very quick breakdown by origin, endemism, conservation status, and the number of taxa within each module. And we're then able to drill down into different, more detailed dashboards. So in my case, I'm a fish guy. I'm always most interested in the fish. So I'm going to once again drill down into the detailed dashboard for the fishes of this area. I know there's a critically endangered fish that I'm particularly interested in, but you could just as well do the same thing for invertebrates or for adult odonates or for anurans as well. So if I hit dashboard, that's going to take me into the detailed fish dashboard for those sites. And now you can see things get a lot more exciting. Once again, here on the left, we have our filter history, and we have a little map showing the location of our sites, which we can save if we want to. We have that overview information of origin, endemism, and conservation status, a breakdown of the number of fish taxa within the different categories. For example, how many non-native records are there in those sites versus native records. At least in this area, we still have the fish data being dominated by native species, which is a good sign. But if we look at occurrences, you can see that the overwhelming majority were for critically endangered taxa, which if you look at that in combination with the fact that most of the records are from micro-endemic level 1, so highly endemic species that are probably native and probably critically endangered, is immediately really useful information from a conservation perspective. Once again, there are data on when the different sites were visited, which can be drilled down deeper by hitting the See More tab, and then the occurrence data, all the occurrence data for those sites, which again can be downloaded as a CSV file. Once again, at the bottom here, we see the metadata table. In this case, looks like the majority of these data are coming from GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. And then up on the right here, we once again get a breakdown of the data by origin, endemism, conservation status as pie charts, but also the different sampling methods and biotopes if they are available for those data. And this is where the power of the FBIS visualization tools becomes apparent. So you can see immediately that the data for these sites span a really nice time period of almost 60 years, the first records being collected in 1964, all the way through to last year, with some peaks in sampling efforts, which in themselves are quite interesting. You can see when the different species were recorded, and you can see that this is a really nice, diverse suite of species that have been recorded in these sites. You can have a breakdown by native or non-native species. And once again, you can interact with these graphs to maybe turn off native species to see when the non-native species really appeared on the scene. It's very interesting to see that, clearly some of these sites were sampled as long ago as the 60s and the 70s, but non-native species only really seem to appear in the area a little bit later. Again, you can visualize the data over time as packaged by endemism or conservation status. And what I'm seeing here is fewer and fewer records of these critically endangered taxa at these sites. And that's really an overview of the multi-site dashboards. Again, these graphs can be downloaded using the little download options. And the multi-site dashboard can then be exited. You can get back to the map by closing that panel, by closing your panels, and by refreshing, hitting the refresh button, and then you're ready for your next search. So that's it from me on the site dashboards. And in the next tutorial, we're going to be having a look at the taxon dashboards. Thanks very much. and I'll see you all next time.
Thanks, Jim. And I think what I'd like to do now is just stop sharing my screen and we can open it up for questions. So hands up if there's a question you want to articulate verbally. If otherwise, feel free to type in the chat for clarity on today's session or any other sessions preceding this, or in fact, any questions. And if it's in an upcoming session, we'll just mention that. So feel free. Jem, shall we do what we did last time? You can just lead through the questions.
Yeah, sure thing. Morning, everyone. Thanks, Astrid, for your clapping hands emoji. Glad you enjoyed that session. Right, cool. We have a few questions coming up in the chat. So the first one is from Sachin Pillay, who enjoyed it and asks, in this example, are the occurrences and abundances generated from user uploaded data, or is this a frequently monitored site?
It's a combination. So whatever data gets added is shown. So for example, a lot of the historical data, I'll just share my screen again, will be most likely from GBIF. But I see Jean Roos has very recently, and Zanil from Grootvadersbos Conservancy, they've been adding SAS data as recently as this month. So it includes the full time span of data added by both us, the FBIS team, in other words, historical data and GBIF data we've harvested, but also from every user that's added the data, because the data is immediately available on the FBIS. Okay.
Thanks, Helen. All right, so we'll go next to a question from Jean Roos, and then we'll pop over to Astrid's hand and then come back to Essie. So Jean asks whether there's a way to choose only selected sites of interest. In other words, multiple sites, but only those of interests. So I'm assuming she's asking, can you basically do a search for a set of sites that presumably there's site codes, but not necessarily grouped in such a way you could draw around them with a polygon or a spatial filter.
Okay, thanks, Jean. So at the moment, the only way to select a group of sites would be to use the filters or the lasso, as Jeremy demonstrated. So if, for example, you wanted to see the sites that were owned by you, because remember in FBIS we do have data ownership. So if you added data or created a site, sorry, it's not working, that you then become the owner of that site and the owner of the data in that site. Even though everyone can see it, you are still the only person who can edit that data. So in Jean's case, to see all of your sites would be, you'd be able to put in yourself as the owner. And then if you wanted a subset of sites, perhaps only in the primary, secondary catchment G1, for example, you could apply a second filter that would then be generated or return the reduced set of records. Perhaps there isn't any G1. Let's try G2. And I think this also speaks to something that came out previously, that under your profile, it would be nice to kind of keep a record of sites that you were commonly interested in. So at the moment, that's not possible, but we have made a note of how to add that as functionality. So in this case, Jean, these are your sites that you created or site sampling dates that you sampled, the sites in the G2 primary catchment. And that's a way to drill down in sort of a refined set. But to then save that under your profile is not yet a function we offer, but we are looking into it. Please jump in if I haven't quite addressed your question, Jean.
Cool. Jean says thanks. So
Cool.
Helen, I think you've covered that. Yeah, she says you have. And just to add further to Helen's explanation there, in the same way that you can search for all of the sites that essentially belong to the person that has uploaded them, you can also search for all the sites that have been entered as part of a particular database as well. So, for example, for us at the Freshwater Research Center, we have an FRC database where all the records that we enter when we go and do surveys would come up, or the Grootvadersbos Conservancy have done a similar thing, and it's quite a nice quick way to quickly get all the sites that your organization has been monitoring in your area of interest.
And with this study reference, what's quite useful is you can select multiple. So in this case, if we want all of the work ever done by Grootvadersbos, then we can add all three under study references. So this was a specific project sampling. This was a slightly different one. And then that's the database that belongs to the Grootvadersbos Conservancy. If you click then apply, you can at a glance get all of those sites and then drill down to the dashboards that Jeremy went through today. So you can see that they've got fish, invertebrates, and a neuron record, or for one species, 4 records. Thanks.
Thanks, Helen. All right, I think let's take 2 hands that are up, and then we'll come back to the questions in the chat. So first up, we've got a question from Astrid. Morning, Astrid.
Hi,
or
Astrid.
Good afternoon.
Morning, everyone. It's a great thing you are doing. I mean, these dashboards really, they are really very nice. My question would go to the multi-site dashboard. I mean, if you have different sites in different years, the occurrences are just summed up in the graphs, for example. And what if you don't have just present absence data, but abundance data, then they are also summed up?
Yes, thanks, Astrid. Yeah, at the moment, each occurrence records is a 1, and then that gets added to produce the graph. I think I'll just share my screen again. We do, if abundance data was collected, it is available, but only as a when you download the CSV file. So if, for example, we drill into this dashboard, the fish dashboard for the Grootvadersbos, you can see their records. So each of these is 1 occurrence. So total occurrences of for this whole query. So that was 39 sites, but there were only X number of records. And then if you then go down to the CSV file, if you download that data, if abundance data was included, and we also include things like sampling method, sampling efforts, so that you can actually work out catch per unit effort. So if the person who added the data included that, when you do the download as a CSV, that data will become available. But at the moment, it's not shown on the graph. It's just occurrence data on the graph.
Okay, thanks, cool.
Okay.
Thanks, Astrid. And yeah, if some of you are starting to think, what occurrence data, like we haven't looked at how occurrence data or abundance data are added yet, don't worry. We are going to be looking in quite a bit of detail at how abundance data are dealt with, in addition to the standard occurrence records that are on FBIS. So that's coming up in another tutorial. Okay, we got a hand from Taryn Dry. Welcome, Taryn. Feel free to ask your question.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. And I think this is an absolutely excellent system and service. My question is GIS-based. You mentioned earlier on that you can download the data. Is this platform Esri driven? Is it possible, for instance, for our area in the Overstrand to get information in a GIS format?
Thanks, Taryn. So the platform is all open source, but it's not a focus of it's not like a QGIS. We've got a spatial front end, but it's not as powerful as a QGIS type system. But when you download the CSV file, it includes the latitude and longitude coordinates as the GIS, whatever it needs to be imported into GIS. So the workflow is fairly easy to get the data out and then to bring it into whatever GIS platform you're using, including the S3.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Right. So we're going to go back to the chat and then we'll come to Debbie's question. So in the chat, we have a question from S.I. Bosman, who asks about interactions with the graphs on the detailed dashboard. And for example, if you only wanted to look at the native species on the graph, then the question is really, if you download that graph, what will it look like? Will it just have the information that you've kind of set by removing the non-native species, or will it have everything when you download that image?
Okay, good question. So let's, what is it, conservation status that you mentioned specifically? Okay,
it was native and non-native species.
Origin. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, the same would apply to any. So if we just, if we downloaded that graph now, you would see it would come straight away into I use, you get the origin, okay, with everything. And then let's see if we wanted to just see non-native species. We downloaded it. We haven't tested this. Let's see what we get. Download. Okay, so at the moment it combines the graphs are not interactive. I mean, what's downloaded is the non-interactive graph. So it's the one in its entirety. I suspect the coding in the back end to integrate this together with the SVG is potentially complicated, but we will make a note because I can see that there would definitely be a use case for that, especially if you wanted to show a graph, for example, of just the critically endangered. It'd be nice to just get a graph that you've selected based on excluding some of the categories, in this case, conservation categories. So as I've mentioned in previous sessions, we do take note of all questions and recommendations and queries from you, the community. So we will add this to our list of wishes, because I definitely think that there would be a use case for that. So thank you. Thank you for that question.
And just to add on to that, there is a way to do it that's a little bit of a workaround, I guess, if you're looking for that graph, which would be to hit that button on the left of the screen there, download the data as a CSV file, and then you can convert that into Microsoft Excel and work with the raw data and quite easily produce that graph yourself of the native species only.
Exactly. Thanks, Jim. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So we're now moving on to some questions from Debbie. Debbie, welcome. You've written in the chat, but I see your hands up as well. So why don't you just, you can just turn your mic on and ask a question.
Hi, thanks. Hi, Helen. Hi, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. My question is, let's call it policy regulatory based. And the question is, can regulators or government use FBIS to basically use, because obviously it's science-based, as a regulatory tool? So basically to search for invasive species and where they are in the country. So basically presence and absence and where they are. So if you're looking for one specific species, and let's take an example, which is one that is a 1A in the country now, which I put an example in the chat box, the narrow-clawed crayfish, which came in with two hitchhikers, leeches. And those leaches, we need to now do risk assessments on because they have species shifted onto other aquatic organisms in rivers and dams in the Free State region, but we don't know where the narrow-clawed crayfish is in the country elsewhere. So can we use FBIS to see where they've been picked up elsewhere in the country to strengthen our request for a risk assessment, for instance?
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, very, very good question. So FBIS, the FBIS team and the FBIS data, we've tried to be as exhaustive as possible in terms of mobilizing data for the country, but it is by no means all the data that's available. It's a continual work in progress. And that's why this training is so critical, because as the FBIS team, we can't possibly mobilize all the data. So we really do need the community to grab the system and update it with scientifically, rigid data that they do have available. So in the example here, this is the name of the crayfish, right? We might not have any records, because if no records have been added to FBIS and there are no records on GBIF, then it's going to return nothing. It doesn't mean that this species isn't in South Africa or in different parts of South Africa, but the data hasn't yet made its way up into FBIS. And we had this issue previously with looking for certain invasive fish species where the latest record was, say, 5 years ago. And I think the issue in South Africa around, the lack of resources for regular monitoring and then getting the data pipeline correct so that the data gets into FBIS is a bit of a stumbling block to this. Jem, I don't know if you'd like to add anything more there, or Debbie jump in for some more responses. Maybe Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. I think you've covered it well. And in summary, I think the data that are, on FBIS, the occurrence data for any species can quite easily be traced to where that data point came from. So it's quite easy to see the reliability of a data point that way. But just to sort of zoom out a little bit for a second to give a bit of perspective into the different, I think we covered this in one of the earlier sessions, but there are a few different ways that data can make their way into the platform. Helen mentioned a big data mobilization exercise that we underwent and probably contacted several of you to request data to manually add to the platform. But the FBIS also automatically pulls in data from other systems, for example, GBIF. And through GBIF, iNaturalist research grade records. Also, there are also links with certain citizen science databases as well. So there's kind of a constant flow of regulated data coming in from different sources. And it may be that in the case of this invasive crayfish, that there may have been surveys done, and it may have been recorded, but those data may not have made their way into the FBIS yet. So yeah, just to sort of agree with what Helen was saying, is the more current, the more we add data to the platform, the more powerful and current it becomes, and the more useful it is for doing things like monitoring new invasions. A really good question.
And just to add to that, if there are any big data sets, especially from your side, Debbie, that you're aware of, that we can pull into FBIS, either existing data sets that are continually updated or old sort of data sets that are sitting in Excel files, it's quite easy, and we have a system whereby we can transcribe that data and upload it into the system. So that we could definitely help with that in terms of
Helen, could you maybe give me a contact person or a contact point at FBIS? Because there's a lot of research going on with DNA fingerprinting and whatever with all these new 1A species, and there's a lot of data. So if I can just have one contact point at FBIS, I can notify all the researchers that are currently doing research to just contact that one person. as the entry point into FBIS. If you can just email me that one contact, and then I will just email that out to everybody to say, all your data, please, to this one person at FBIS, so that we can send all the data that we're collating from the biosecurity side as well as the research side into one point. Then at least we've got a coordinated side from government side. Yeah,
no, sure. We have an FBIS email. It's basically, I will email it to you. Maybe Jem just put it in the chat, fbis@frcsa.org.za. But Debbie, we also want to train the data providers. So in other words, it would be great if some people within your organization, when they do the surveys, also learn how to just put the data directly up. It's important to share the load from a sustainability perspective, that each organization updates it, because it's actually pretty easy to get data in. It's not, not onerous, doesn't take lots of time. But if there's a lot of older data in spreadsheet format, then we will need to facilitate getting that in as a first step. So yes, please, we will let you know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah, and just to, just to another point on that, again, zooming out, in the same way that the data can come into FBIS from different sources, data sets can also be uploaded in different ways. I don't want to go into it in detail now, because we are going to cover it in upcoming tutorials, how data can be added to the platform. But the one way is by interoperating with existing platforms like GBIF and automatically pulling in data that fit certain criteria. But then manually adding data can be done on a data point by data point basis on the platform itself, or like Helen was mentioning, like bigger existing data sets can be done within a bulk upload process. And the easiest way to do that at this point is to get in touch via the FBIS email in the chat. And it's actually a pretty easy system to get big data sets in, so we're not scared of that. But yeah, we'll dive a bit deeper into that in I think it's in a couple of tutorials time. All right, I think let's get back to some of the questions that have been building up in the chat. We've got a question from Lonwabo Mkosi, who asks whether the system is able to notify a user when replicating data or adding data for the same site.
So in other words, it's the same site and it's the same sampling date, and then you're adding the same fish record that perhaps your colleague also added. No, you don't get a notification, but when adding data, it's always good to go to, you want to add to the data to an existing site, and you will be able to see the most recent very easily, what data was added. So if I go again to let's just select my personal favorite site, and I'm sure Jean will agree, the upper Yonkeshoek River, where we do all of our SAS accreditation. So say you've done a SAS assessment. I'm going to open up a new dashboard, guys, but that's the topic for next week. So this will be a teaser just to kind of get you going. So this is the SAS dashboard, but very easily, if I just scroll down to the important point that I want to make, is you can go all the way down here, and on the left-hand side, we see all of the SAS assessments that were done at this particular site, from the very earliest all the way down to the most recent, which is most likely Jean's, which was the 24th of August this year. So if you're part of Jean's team and you didn't know that she'd add the data, and then you go and you want to add the data and you see that data's there, then you can very easily go into that data and check, oh, this is the same data that I was going to add and not do it. And the same will apply for a fish record or an invertebrate record, etc. So I think that's the best way to double check if you are uncertain that somebody else might have added the same data. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Helen. Right. So think that's covered. I think we're now up to date with questions. Oh no, we got another one in the chat from Leo Quayle, and this time it asks, does the system have an API? Can other applications communicate with FBIS in that way?
So at the moment, the inward system of the award team, Sharon Pollard and Hugo Tiff, they have developed in collaboration with us an API that allows the system users of inwards to navigate to FBIS. So Leo, in theory, yes, it's possible. Quite how it's done is beyond my pay grade. But yeah, certainly if there was a use case for it, then I think just reach out to us independently too, so we can understand what it is that you need and how we can help with that.
Thanks, Helen. Looks like that has answered Leo's question. Thanks, Leo. Okay, cool. So we've got about 10 minutes left. If there are any other questions or comments, it looks like we're up to date in the chat and no further hands popping up at this stage. Helen, I'm not sure if there's anything else you wanted to sort of touch on while you've got your screen up there.
Yeah, nothing specifically. Maybe just one thing that I wanted to probably mention is in the when you navigate to a single site dashboard, and I'm just picking a random one here. So in this case, it's, let me rather get a fish one. You can, the dashboards are designed in a way that you can drill down to the original, well, you can also sort up and down here by occurrences. That's quite a useful interactive thing to do. But if we wanted to go into a specific dashboard for a specific site, not only do we get everything, let me just move that up to the top, you know, all the details that Jeremy mentioned, but it's also quite useful to be able to go down to the original site visit data. And Jeremy did mention that you can open up all the site visits, but perhaps it's worthwhile just showing you how that works. So the first 5 are shown, and if there's more than 5, you just go into site visits. But essentially, if we wanted to go into the original site, this is what you would get. So it would be the detailed data for that site. You would get a map and shows who collected the data, the source reference. In this case, it's the Sandparks fish database collected by Robin Pitterser. Don't worry about all of this. That's going to be the topic for adding data. But essentially, you can see all of that data per species. And in this case, you can see here that there was indeed abundance data recorded, asterisk to answer to show you how it can be recorded. So it was observed. If abundance data hadn't been recorded, it would have been 0, but in this case, it has been recorded. So in all instances, you can go backwards and forwards, drilling down into different sites, and then you can also see at a single button all of the site visits that made up all of those data points, and you can see who collected it, etc., etc. That's really all I wanted to just expand on. There's nothing else. I think everything's fairly well covered. Perhaps one more thing. Let me just get rid of this chat because it blocks things. There is a way also to export the entire dashboard as an image. If you click on that, it downloads the whole dashboard as a PNG, which is sometimes quite useful to put as an appendix in a report. So instead of having to download each individual graph, you can get a summary screenshot of the entire dashboard. Okay, I think that's probably covers it adequately.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I think it's nice to be able to drill down into the different sites and site visits. And we've got a hand up from Astrid. So yeah, Astrid, feel free to ask a question.
I'm sorry, I'm always bothering you with my questions. Now I want to come back to this replicate data. I mean, if someone submits a record to GBIF and also puts it into FBIS, and then you are going to harvest GBIF, so it will come back to FBIS. Is there any procedure how to exclude these double records? I mean, there are a lot of double records anyway already on GBIF, so
yeah. Thanks, Astrid. It's a very so obviously the easy one is if you're adding data to check that it's not already on, but I hear what you're saying. It could be duplicated through different sources like GBIF and FBIS, and in fact, Virtual Museum potentially as well. So we have worked quite extensively with our developers to try and get a duplicate checker in place, but it's proved to be quite a difficult task.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of parked it for now. What we do internally before we upload data to FBIS, like say we're facilitating the import of historical data from the KZN wildlife, old Mike Koch, for example, Leo, you would know him, his old fish data. We actually extracted data that existed on FBIS, which included GBIF, and then within Excel manually checked for duplicates and made sure that data didn't get uploaded again. But it's not a long-term solution. So the long-term solution is really to keep working on what we call our duplicate checker, so that if a record comes in twice, we can easily pick it up and make sure that it's not duplicated, because obviously that's not what one wants. Does that anything to add, Astrid?
No, sounds perfectly fine to me, because this is really one of the main problems. And if you're working on a duplicate checker already, this is cool.
Yeah.
I want to have this system for Europe as well.
Yeah. So it is, as I say, quite challenging, but I think we just need to get our developers to apply. Well, we need to apply more pressure to them to really get it working properly, because it's important. It's critically important. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just again to point out that, while we try as much as possible to ensure that the data are not duplicated on FBIS and are as accurate as possible, the onus at the end of the day is up to the user to download the CSV file and just do a check for duplicates before using those data for a use case. That's the best fail-safe that we have at the moment, but hopefully we will have a really nice, easy to use duplicate checker in the future. But just to be sure, that's the way we've been doing it.
Thanks, Jim. Leo? Hi.
Thanks, guys. I'm not sure this question is particularly related to today's tutorial. But it is related to an earlier discussion around regulatory aspects, but more towards monitoring aspects. So I'm wanting to know, is the data arranged in such a way that points are aligned with river reaches? And as such, can FBIS provide us an opportunity to generate ongoing mean data for specific river reaches, so that we can ultimately generate a sort of time series monitoring tool for river reaches, for quad catchments, for whatever scale? Is that possible, or is that something that you guys are thinking towards?
Thanks, Leo. Good question. So at the moment, all the data is pinned to a site. We haven't, other than being able to extract data using filters, we haven't provided any sort of summary statistics or lumping of data to a reach or a quaternary or border catchment. There are inherent cautions or problems associated with that, but I mean, I can understand why one would want to do it in some instances. So the short answer is no, at the moment you can't do summary statistics of any form. For example, it would be nice to be able to say how many endangered fish species are within a particular spatial unit, for example, be that a river reach or a quaternary catchment. It is something we would like to do. We just don't at the moment have that extra funding to be able to focus on that, because I think it's quite a big task. But we will definitely add it to our wish list, because I do think it's important.
Thanks, Helen. It's just as a matter of interest, is the site data, is that linked to through an attribute? Is that linked to a specific river reach, or is it just a GPS coordinate?
So we have something that works in the background called Geocontext. So for every site that you may click on, if I then open up the detailed dashboard, so you get, obviously you get some information here, and in this case it's not linked to a reach, but it is linked to a geomorphological zone and to a river, which this information that's included in the overview panel, all of this information is generated on the fly, or not on the fly, but like it's a system that's been developed by our developers, Cartosa, which any point, as long as you've got a latitude and a longitude, and you've got underlying spatial data sets, it uses these coordinates to go and grab all this other information, including the river names. So this is from the 1 in 500,000 or 1 in 50,000, actually the names from the 1 in 500 DWS site. It grabs the geomorphological zone, also from the DTM, the digital terrain models. It grabs the ecoregions, the province. All of this is from the underlying spatial layers that we've linked to it already. River management units are currently only available for the Western Cape, so that obviously is blank because it doesn't occur. It's not available for the rest of the country. So that is the extent to which we are able to provide kind of reach type information or location type information. Do you want to add to that? Is there another, if that explains it adequately?
No, I think that's great, and it's very useful in itself. I think ultimately what we are wanting to be able to achieve is to be able to link condition type information to reaches across the country, to be able to show ongoing changes in condition or in species diversity, etc. Yeah. So I think ultimately the underlying data needs to be, as you say, the river management areas are only available in the Western Cape. That sort of information and ultimately also decent river line data needs to be available for us to be able to effectively join the condition data to those specific river reaches.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's kind of where we need to go. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So obviously we don't fiddle or fix any spatial layers. We can only serve what is available. So as soon as say there was a river reach spatial layer for South African rivers, there's no reason we couldn't pull that in and then show it visualizations, and then condition per reach could then easily be generated. But until such a layer becomes available, we have to work what we've got. And as it is, we've hit quite a few stumbling blocks with the rivers coverage. You'd think that we would have a really good rivers coverage, but unfortunately, at a large scale, the 1 in 500s rivers coverage is good, but there's a lot of rivers that don't have names, and there's a lot of rivers that are missing that you would get on the finer 1 in 50,000 NGI coverage, but the NGI rivers layer has no names, so it does become a little bit problematic, and that is something that I will be raising again when I go through the adding a site tutorial, because we've just worked in a temporary override because we've had instances, I think, Jean, you also mentioned you wanted to add SAS data to a tributary that had no name. So what happens in the FBIS in terms of the coding, it grabs the nearest river. Now, if you're putting in a small tributary of the Berg and it's got no name, it's going to grab the Berg and then it's going to not be correctly named. So we've built in an override to be able to allow a user to add their own name, the correct river name of that unnamed tributary, because it is available often. It's just not available in the 1 in 500,000 coverage. And the same with geomorphological zone. At the moment, it's grabbed from the digital terrain model that Anita Moorman from DWS et al. Generated in 2008, I think. But in some cases, that's not a good reflection of the ground truth geomorphological zone. So again, we provide the flexibility for FBIS users to update that layer. And then that is the one that is then used in that overview panel that I just showed you in terms of what is given return to the user. So you would get you can see here already, we've got a river name. So that's the one derived from the 1 in 500,000 river coverage. The original river name is what you might have called it, or what is available on a finer resolution that you're confident is accurate. And then the geomorphological zone, that's the digital terrain model derived zone. But if you know, in fact, this is a lower foothill, you can add that when you create your site. And what is then used is it's shown here as well. And then the coding is derived from this is the old river health code that I generated back in the dark ages, where we use secondary catchment. Let me just zoom in a bit. So the standard, sorry, I can't zoom in too much more. So we've got your 2 letters of your secondary catchment, the first 4 letters of your river, in this case, the Lavuvu, and then either a code, like in the example I gave you of the Jonkershoek Mountain, which is a standard code used for the River Health Program and now REMP, or it just provides a numerical name, a numerical number that's added. So yeah, that's just to talk you through some of the complexities around this geocontext data that is currently available. But we will go into it again in another session.
Super.
Thanks,
Thanks, Helen. Just to note that Nancy and Achua and Pearl at the freshwater program are working at the moment on improving the rivers layer. I'm assisting them, and it's hopefully we'll certainly in the Greater Mgani catchment and the Berg Breda catchment, hopefully we'll have a much better river data set to work with in the near future.
That's great news. Yeah, I was aware of it. I didn't know you were involved. So thanks for that. Yeah, it takes a village to grow FBIS. So all hands on deck wherever possible. Okay, are there any new questions in the chat? We're just after 11, but we can stick around for a bit more. Are there any more questions?
That looks like that's it for today, Helen.
Okay. Good. Okay, thanks everybody for another good session. And as always, we'll be sharing the video. And yeah, keep well, keep biodiversity at the top of mind, and see you next week. We will be focusing on, let me just dive back to my Excel spreadsheet. It's actually, I'm going to do a tutorial on the SAS dashboard, which gave you a teaser today, but we'll be diving into the SAS dashboard, and thereafter a session on the taxon dashboard, and then the next lot are to follow. So thank you, everybody.